Hello and welcome to Make the Logo Bigger. My name is Brenton. This podcast is your gateway into the world of advertising production, crafted especially for those who are stepping in new, aiming to become producers, or simply eager to understand the inner workings of advertising and marketing. We're here to share insights and knowledge you've been looking for, with stories, tips, and real conversations from the pros. We're simplifying the process for everyone with a production curiosity. Whether you're just starting out or keen to explore the production side of ads, you've found the right place. Let's jump in. Our guest today is Wilf Sweetland, a name that many of you in the industry will undoubtedly recognise. Wilf started his journey with aspirations of becoming an actor, but quickly transitioned into production roles after a stint in LA. His career has seen him rise through the ranks from a runner in Melbourne to production manager and eventually to roles of managing director and global CEO at Sweetshop. Most recently, Wilf launched his own production company, Fred, to get back to the creative roots he loves. In today's episode, we'll explore Wilf's fascinating career path, the invaluable mentorship he received, and the key piece of advice that has guided him throughout his journey. Anticipate, but never assume. We'll dive into what makes a great producer, the crucial relationship dynamics between producers and directors, and how understanding creativity and logistics can make or break a project. Wilf also shares his thoughts on the importance of concise and authentic treatments, the changing landscape of the advertising industry, and his vision for his new venture, Fred. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting in the industry, Wilf's insights are sure to provide plenty of food for thought. Wilf Sweetland. All right, let's jump into it. Wilf Sweetland, thanks so much for jumping on. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. Let's just start out, Wilf, with every conversation. Can you just give us a little bit of a background about how you got into the industry and where you got your start and then where you are to today?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on board. So I started out pursuing an acting career, actually, which led me to LA. And I was trying to get a job over there and really found it very difficult to get even a waiting, busboy type job because there were so many wannabe actors living there, taking up all those roles. Anyway, I ended up living with someone who was a production accountant and neighbour who was a location manager, and did a bit of time on Austin Powers too as a location assistant on the back lot there, and then did a bit more travelling after that. Moved back to Melbourne, and my cousin who was a production manager who'd been in London working for a lot of big stuff. She was working with Radical Media a lot during the day. Tarsem was directing massive global campaigns. She got me started as a runner, basically. So I started freelancing in Melbourne as a runner, did a lot of work for Exit Films, established a good relationship with them, was offered a full-time job in another production company, and actually went back to Exit and said, look, I've been offered this job, do you think I should go full-time? And they said, we do, but we'd like you to come in here full-time. And so took a job as a runner at Exit, replacing someone else who'd been a runner who was moving up into a director's assistant position, a guy who never really amounted to much. Greg Fraser's his name. Replaced him and stayed there for a while, and was really lucky enough to work with an amazing production manager there who taught me a huge amount. And then went production manager at another company that's no longer around called The Film Business. And then Greg actually introduced me to a graphic designer who was wanting to move into direction. We teamed up, and I got us back into Exit, and then we were together for sort of 8 years there. And then after that, was asked to come and work at Sweetshop. So I ran the Australian office as MD for a little while, and then about 7 years, and then moved up into the global CEO role for 5 years, and left Sweetshop last year and took some time off, and have now just started my own production company called Fred.
You mentioned a production manager who was really great at showing you the ropes. What was it about them that was impressive in the way that they helped you and guide you in your path or your career?
So initially, when I was working as a freelance runner, I had a lot of people sort of take me under their wing, and I just really loved the excitement of being on set and making stuff and being able to contribute to that. And I mean, from a lot of people sort of supported me and guided me, and from grips like Robbie Hansford and Glenn Arrowsmith to production designers like Joe Ford, take me under her wing and just helping me learn and understand things, and I just wanted to learn as much as I could. And I would sit in the camera truck while they were downloading rushes, film cans and all that sort of stuff. And, obviously the runner's got to take the rushes to the lab, or in the old days. And so I just wanted to learn about all that sort of stuff, and chatting with DPs and so on. And my cousin, who was a production manager, gave me a piece of advice that's always sort of stuck with me, and that is anticipate but never assume.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was sort of my golden rule, if you like. And then after I got a full-time job at Exit as a runner, I worked with under Liz Rocker. She was a production manager in there at the time. And Liz was just absolutely amazing. She just taught me so much about production, the detail required, the thinking about it, and needing to understand every single department to work out what questions you have to ask to get the information that you need to be able to put the shoot together. So I was really lucky to work under Liz for a year or two or something like that. And yeah, we had a great relationship. She was a lot of fun, and really helped me. I think, taught me a lot of stuff that I still use every single day today.
Your experience, you've worked your way through, you've been a producer, then you've ran ran a company as global CEO. If we look at producing on its own, you've obviously had to hire and fire, but more so, what do you think when it comes to producers, and when you have hired, what are the qualities that you believe make a standout producer, particularly in today's industry?
I think the qualities that make a standout producer are the ability to, there's quite a few things. One is the ability to remain calm. You need to be able to balance sometimes highly stressful situations with personalities, agendas from all different components. Filmmaking is a very collaborative effort, and obviously in advertising, there's the camps of the client, the agency, and the director and production company, and then you've got the crew and the logistics and the scenario and all that sort of stuff. So someone who can balance things and be sort of, take things on board and not really react in an emotional way. I think as a producer, you really need to practice equanimity, be able to just kind of take things on board, think about the best solution, consult with everyone who's involved, or take the lead on that. So being calm under pressure in those situations is a big one. Having an understanding of people and personalities, how to work with many different types of personalities, how to understand when people have an agenda that needs to be listened to and accommodated for. People management is a really big one. Then there is the skill set of understanding how a film set works and what needs to be achieved. And, obviously that can be very simple in a simple studio shoot, or it can be highly complex with a lot of moving parts over many days, on location, multiple countries, those sorts of things. A producer is someone who understands financial information, how to prepare a budget, how to run a budget, what things mean, what they cost, and what ramifications of people's decisions mean, whether that's a production decision, a director's decision, or an agency decision, or a client request, and so on. So having a holistic, I guess, viewpoint over everything. And then ultimately, I think one of the biggest qualities is someone who really takes responsibility for everything they do. And that is, like, I love to see an attitude where the producer treats a job like it's their own company. So they're really putting their neck out, making decisions and having that sort of underlying philosophy that it's completely their responsibility. So they need to think about it in that way. Certainly when I'm employing producers, line producers, whether they're freelance, full-time, whatever, that's what I'm looking for, is someone that I know would really treat the entire production as their own. And, that's not just on a financial perspective, like for a production company. It's actually about relationships, because the producer really is often the main point of contact on a job with the agency, and that sort of rolls out into with the client as well when a shoot's happening. So you want to make sure that they're really thinking along those lines.
Two parts there. You've got technical skills, which I guess can be learned and taught. Excuse me. What about the qualities that are, staying calm, people management, relationships, those kind of skills? Do you think they're inherent in an individual, or do you think that they can be learned?
It's a really interesting question, and I've enjoyed listening to people's responses on your podcast from the previous episodes. I actually think they're inherent, those skills. I think fundamentally they're within someone or they're not. Now, I think when they're within someone, they might be at different levels and they can be developed and you can build upon them, and so on. I think there's a natural thing that some people have, quite a lot of people, to be able to be empathetic in that way, in terms of, you often hear people talking, oh, they're a real people person, Now, it's not to say that's the be-all and end-all of being a producer, because I know people who have that sort of stuff, but then don't have the other side of it, the ability to run finance or run technical sort of stuff or have that bigger picture. So just being a people person isn't enough. You've got to be a people person, but also have the ability to be grounded in the technical aspect as well.
Producers working with directors, obviously the skills involved with combining the two skill sets. Do you think that a producer needs to have a really good understanding of how creative comes together, in a sense when it comes to what the director's trying to create and his vision? But then again, conversely, do you think that a director needs to kind of have the same basic understanding of what it takes to be a producer and what it needs to do, how the job needs to come from a finance or a logistics background? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think a producer 100% needs to understand creative and understand how a director works, how they're planning to achieve things, because without that deep creative understanding, they're not going to make the decisions that are going to put, the most on screen or give the director as much opportunity to create what they're trying to create, to answer the brief of the creatives. I think if you've got a producer who is not a creative producer and they're just more of a nuts and bolts financial, time frame, come on, we've got to move on, like a producer telling a director you've got to move on when the performance hasn't been got to us, the director hasn't got the shot, hasn't got the performance or whatever, is not really understanding, I think, the whole process. And of course, there's always time pressure and that sort of stuff. And you definitely need to you remind a director they've got to move on after they've got it in the can, or, they can't go necessarily for millions and millions of different variations or different versions. But I would put that creative understanding at the very core of an advertising production company producer. And then the second part of that question, does a director need to understand how a producer works? 100%. There are directors who are really interested in that and directors who aren't interested in it, but it's very much a team effort. The director's not going to be able to achieve their goal or their vision or what they've put in their treatment unless they're working as a team with a producer. Mm-hmm. If you've got someone who's stonewalling the other part of the team, whether that's production or producer or director, it's not going to make for a very successful outcome. I think the best directors, I I've worked with will always be really strong in their vision and really driven, but they'll always want the producer who's going to help them achieve that while balancing, from the director's point of view, while balancing, maintaining, making it the most creative thing they can.
So how important is it for producers to assert their ideas and perspectives in discussions with directors when working together?
It's a really good question. It's really about finding a balance between a director and a producer. When you have a director producer who work together all the time as a team over many years, then obviously there's a lot of shorthand and there's a real knowledge about how the other person works and working together as a team and that feeling of trust there. A producer needs to be able to listen to the director, find out what they want, understand what they want, and then give them feedback on how that can be achieved. And, if it can be achieved lock, stock and barrel, or if the compromises need to be made. So I think, it's a producer's job to offer up options for the director in terms of how they want to achieve something, whether it's the entire shoot or it's a particular shot or a particular technique, whatever, and there are always trade-offs. Filmmaking is a compromised activity, or an activity where you have to make compromises all the time. So you can have this, but then you can't have that. Or if you really need that, then we'll change that to juggle money or resources or time, or, whatever that may be. So I would think that it's really important for a producer to give creative responses, I guess, and options for when a director wants to achieve a particular thing. I don't think it's a producer's role to say, oh, you should do this or you should do that. It's always in response to what the director wants to achieve.
Let's talk about a favourite terminology that I hear a lot about: adding value. How do you define adding value in the context of a producer's role?
I think a producer adds value to the director and the production by really being able to understand what the director is trying to achieve and what the agency need to achieve for their client. Obviously, the producer is the go-between between the agency and the director, and unless they're really understanding that at a creative level, it can be a very tough road to navigate. So being able to navigate that road from a producer's point of view, you need to have the experience, you need to have the understanding of creative, you need to have the relationship skills to be able to manage agendas and what needs to be achieved. So without having those skill sets and being able to bring that into a stressful working environment with the director under pressure, then you're really not setting the whole thing up for success.
Can I ask you about, Wilf, what about treatments? Can I get your thoughts on when a treatment is put together, what do you think makes great treatments? Do they need to be long? Do they need to be short? Do they need to have lots of pictures, be very verbose? What makes a great treatment?
Ultimately, what makes a great treatment is a distilling and a clarity around how the director wants to bring that script to life. That's probably how to sum it up. Mm-hmm. What form that takes, is anyone's sort of interpretation. Some treatments, as I'm sure you're aware, can be super long and heaps of images and heaps of words and that sort of stuff. Other treatments can be really short and succinct. I think, I'm always mindful that when an agency is putting out a script to treat, there'd be 3 different treatments coming through. If it's unnecessarily long, and I think that might work against you. Depends on how involved the script is fundamentally. I'm always a fan of probably not wasting words, and just in my own sort of being. I think it's more of a skill to be able to say something shorter than it is to be able to be more verbose. or be verbose. If you can, I think you really need to distill things down and present them in their most succinct way. Then that's sort of my preference way to go. I don't think you need 30 images to describe one scene or one element. I don't think you need 30 pictures of a particular role in terms of talent that you like the look of to describe how you think that person should look. Treatments have become a very costly exercise with directors' assistants, researchers finding images, that sort of stuff. Some directors use treatment writers, which I'm not a fan of. I think even if a director's writing and they may not be the most polished writer, I think in their own words is far stronger than any treatment writer can ever put together. Obviously, treatment writers have their place when directors are busy and they're on another job and they need support because they're in the middle of production and so on. Certainly, treatment writers have their place, but I think the top directors that I've worked with write their own treatments and they find a way to write them, and I think that really shows in their work and comes across as their voice. I think now in the day of obviously ChatGPT and AI, writing modalities, I imagine there's a lot of ChatGPT and treatments and that sort of stuff, but I'm certainly very anti that because creators want to work with a director because of their voice, because of their real, and because of their voice, how they see the world. And I think nothing comes close to representing that as to their own words.
I had a chat with a creative, an ECD, a couple of episodes ago, and it was talking about treatments. Wilfred was talking about the investment that somebody has in a treatment, directors especially, when they actually get it. I can imagine that directors have a lot of, hopefully if they're really busy, they have a lot of treatments that they're putting together. Do you think you're able to tell when somebody's got their heart and soul invested in a treatment? Does it come across? Does it jump off the page to you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are cases where the director's got a great take on the script, and it's quite different to how the script's presented. There are other cases when the script probably there's not a lot of room for a completely different vision to come back. But you can really tell when someone has a deep understanding of it, just in terms of the language they use in their writing. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to write a treatment, and a person's personality and voice needs to come through. I think that sometimes you read a treatment and you think it's just doesn't feel like there's much of anything in there. It feels, it's got everything covered, all the different sections covered and so on, but there's no real voice coming through. There's no if I put myself in the shoes of a creative, what am I really getting from this treatment? And it's pretty much just the script coming back to me, or it just feels like it's, not that the director's just gone through the numbers, because I don't think that happens, but they just haven't been able to really connect or bring anything to it. So yeah, I don't think it's a case of directors not having their heart in it. Just sometimes they're unable to connect and really come up with something, some sort of emotional connection to it.
Is there a treatment that stands out in your mind that you came across that you thought was incredible, but then also translated to what was put on screen? Is there anything that catches your mind at all?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really fortunate in my career to work with a lot of incredible directors who have a great voice and a great vision. Yeah, there's a lot of amazing treatments that have just blown me away when I've read them, and then following it, blowing the agency away and book the job. I probably don't want to mention particular treatments and directors at this point, but I've been really fortunate, as I say, to work with some of the top directors in the world, and particularly now, even they're still, after all this time, still up there in the top 5 directors in the world.
Let's talk about the dynamics between a production team and creative agencies. Obviously, they work pretty closely together when they're on the jobs. What are some common misunderstandings that you think production teams might have about working with a creative agency?
I think sometimes production teams cannot really grasp all the elements that are on the creative side, on the agency side. And I think that can be really dangerous to think, oh, the agency is just, they don't understand the creative process, what we're doing, filmmaking, or, they just can't see what we want to do. And I think that's pretty rarely the case. I think that the agency are part of a much bigger picture that the production company are never really made aware of, and nor they should be, because the agency is making a job for their client. I just, I see it a lot of the time, there might be some grumblings about the creatives or the producer or the agency or the suits or whatever. And I just think there's a lack of understanding there. This is a business. There's a lot of money at stake. There's a lot of relationships at stake on the agency side. And, I think, again, coming back to taking a holistic picture, that everyone's in this to create a good working environment, to create a really successful product that everyone's happy with. We often have to check our egos at the door and work, as a team. That being said, there are times where an agency may not really understand all the nuts and bolts of what's going in to make this production. And so a change might come along and that may have, far-reaching ramifications, like that decision, far-reaching ramifications into production and schedules and, maybe talent or whatever, equipment. So there are those situations, but by and large, I think production teams really need to work as closely with a sort of team environment, as they can with agencies. I think that's the most successful.
What about the relationships between agency producer and production company producer? How important is it from a production company producer side to keep the agency informed up to the level that they need to be, and then obviously keep that relationship strong and keep it flowing and keep it in a good spirit and a good place throughout the production process?
That agency producer, production company producer relationship is critical to the success of the job, in my opinion. Communication is probably the biggest point, I think, in that relationship. And production company producers have to absolutely communicate everything in a timely manner to the agency producer to make sure they've got all the information they need to then pass through their account service team and onto the client. And similarly, the agency producer is really the gateway of information from the client and the account service and the creative team back to the production company producer and director. And so there needs to be a really strong, transparent ease of communication between those two people. And, you can't bother them with every little detail, but, you learn pretty quickly that you need to curate the information in terms of what's going and when it's going. Mm-hmm. And making sure that everyone's aware of any, particular things that some watch outs in production that may be coming up on the shoot, or things that may not be guaranteed, or, issues with talent, or, whatever it can be. I think some of the most rewarding jobs in my career have been where I've had a real sense of trust from the agency producer, and when together we've been able to negotiate pretty tough situations. I think that word trust is a really big word in production, and in that relationship between production company producer and agency producer, knowing that each person trusts the other, and that each person has the other. The agency producer really needs to want to get the best creative output from the production company, and they need to really trust that producer and that director, and trust their ability to deliver what they need for their creatives and for their account service team, and ultimately for their client. And it's something I've always really prided myself on is creating that sense of trust by being diligent, by being transparent. If I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it, and creating that, really, it's creating a platform for the success of the whole job.
What about the relationship between director and creatives? Do you think it's an even more important? Do you think that relationship is even more important and sits above the relationship between the two producers?
I think the relationship between, or the relationship between creatives and the director is obviously critically important to the success of the job. At the end of the day, everyone has a personality, and different people, different personalities working together can give rise to different outcomes. A production company, like a producer director team, work for the agency. So they're contracting to the agency. The agency is paying the bills, the client's paying the agency is paying the production company. So ultimately, that's the hierarchy of how it all works. And, the director has been awarded a job based on their creative vision of the treatment, what they wanted to do, how they wanted to do it. And so that's what they want to try and make. And they need to work with the creatives who, the creatives awarded the job, presumably they want that director to make that sort of treatment as well. There's other influences that can come in to change that, or that might cause some bumps along the road in terms of output of that vision. But that relationship needs to be managed. The director needs to understand what the creatives want, why they want it. Is it just them, or is it something that the client is really demanding? And really try and accommodate that in the best way possible, and either create their own vision and the client's vision, and then see how it goes in the offline and post-production, that sort of stuff. But, ultimately, I think the director needs to have the trust of the creatives for a successful job. It's changed a lot in the 20, 25 years I've been doing this. It used to be like some directors just wouldn't do a treatment, and they would just be given the job based on their reel or who they were, or, past history and that sort of stuff. The job used to just be really just about the filmmaker, and the director was the filmmaker, and they would come on board and they would, create this film based on the script, and that was about it. Whereas it's a really different job for a director these days. I would say that the filmmaking craft is probably 50% of it, and people management and politics, and that's understanding those elements is the other 50%, in terms of having to negotiate how to get on screen what they believe is the best way to represent this script, while at the same time managing the film crew, managing the technical aspects of it, coordinating that sort of stuff. There's been a real shift over the last couple of decades of the director's job in advertising, I think.
So, and these are my words, Wilf, not yours. I'll make that very clear. Do you think that the age of the directors, where they were purely hired on their creative talent, and they might not be the nicest people in the world, do you think that they have a place in this world, in this current day and age?
I think there are some directors with reputations who are still working, that sort of stuff. Certainly as a stereotype, some American directors would be thought of to have a bit of a reputation of doing their own thing and not involve in the agency a lot in that process once they're shooting and so on. And that seems to work for a lot of people over there. I think in Australia, New Zealand, it's probably less so. And I think Australia, New Zealand directors, or directors who are shooting down here regularly, are much more collaborative in that respect. It's hard for a director. They want to get what they think is the most creative version of that script for their reel. And that there may be differences there between what the creatives want. And those guys can be aligned, and then those alignments can diverge during the process, or they can not be aligned from the beginning, which is always a tough way to go. But I think that the whole relationship has changed between clients and agencies and production companies. And production companies, by and large, directors are now generally much more collaborative. And I think agencies don't want to work with directors who aren't collaborative. Like, it's a hard thing that we're doing in terms of filmmaking. It's a lot. It's a process that changes and evolves and is impacted by lots of different things, all different stages throughout, making a commercial. And there's a lot of pressure from clients on agencies, a lot of pressure from agencies internally, a lot of pressure from agencies on production companies. And so I think that by and large, agencies are looking for creative collaborators, people who've got a strong vision, but who really understand what's happening on their side of the fence as well. Because can be really difficult, and if you've got a difficult personality, that can be just one step too far and potentially derail things throughout the process. Well, all of the directors that I'm working with certainly understand that we're working in a business, we're working for someone else, and we need to get the best that we can achieve throughout that process creatively. But it's not always what was the original vision.
So what about time pressures then, Wilf? From your time when you first started to where you see things today, the trajectory of getting a project made, is it safe to say that timelines have compressed dramatically?
Yeah, timelines have really compressed in terms of when I started out to where I am now. Certainly in Australia and New Zealand, you used to have a lot more time in pre-production to get stuff done. But I think that a lot of this is coming from the client side in terms of when they're making their decisions. Often they're leaving their decisions probably later in the piece in terms of the overall timeline for the project, or they're changing things at the last minute, and that needs a rethink by the agency. So I think those things can really compress the filmmaking time. In the States, it's always been a much more compressed timeline than we've had here. It's always been a very short period of time, usually a very short period of time for treatments, and then very short period of time for pre-production. We are, when you have international directors come down to Australia, they're used to working much faster, much quicker, getting things rolling. In Australia, probably like the UK system, we've always had much longer timeframes. But I think they're definitely becoming more compressed.
Treatments, you mentioned earlier on, they're becoming a costly exercise. What are your thoughts about agencies paying for production companies to actually put together treatments?
I think it's a really interesting question, and you need to think about what is the cost of business, really, in terms of in this industry, other industries, that sort of stuff. Do agencies get paid to pitch for their clients' work? Those pitches can take months and months and months and in huge numbers of head hours, and sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're not, and so on. Typically, those pieces of business are worth, multiple millions of dollars, though, and that might be worth, 1, 2, 3 year contracts kind of thing. Whereas production companies are pitching for every single dollar they earn. They're short term, they're one-offs. There's no ongoing, really, work throughout as a result of that pitch. If you look at in Germany over the last few years, the German production companies and agencies got together and came to an agreement where production companies would be paid to pitch. And what happened in that situation is that younger directors, as a result, are getting less of a look in to pitching on work. Because if agencies are paying for pitches, they really want to be paying for directors that they've got a really high chance of using. And so if the agency's now got a budget for the pitch of the proposals of that project, then what they found is that it's a lot harder for younger directors to get a look in because they're just paying for the senior directors or the people who they really want to work with. So I think there's arguments for and against. As a production company owner, I would love to see that there is a commitment from agencies to pay for pitches that are not guaranteed commercials going to be made out of it. So often there'll be a script or a project an agency might be pitching on, and they might want pitches or treatments from production companies in the hope that it will convince the client to make that project, to make that work. I think in that sort of situation, there definitely should be. If there's a chance that job's not going to get made, then I think it's probably an ethical thing to pay production companies for that pitch. We have been paid for pitches in the past in those scenarios, and often there's a production that the agency producer is leading that in terms of wanting to work in an ethical way. Sometimes they've tried to do that and the agency hasn't given them permission to pay production companies. Other times there's been a situation where agencies have asked production companies to pitch on a piece of work that's not necessarily going ahead, and they've been asked to do a very small pitch. There might be 1 or 2 pages just to give an outline of the vision. And then they've gone ahead with one production company and paid that production company to pitch on that job. If that job goes ahead, that pitch fee comes out of the budget. So it's not charged for if the job's successful. It is something I would like to see happen when there's a chance that job's not going to be made. If there's always a chance the job is going to be made, I don't know. Is it just a cost of business?
What advice would you give to someone who's starting out as a production company producer in our industry?
The key piece of advice that I mentioned really early on in this chat is anticipate but never assume. And I think as a mantra that has really helped me in my entire career. Anticipate for all possible outcomes that you can think of, but don't assume any one of them is going to work. And certainly as a producer, when you're on set in that sort of situation, it's really helpful to be in that mindset. What if that goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? What if that person doesn't turn up? What if that piece of equipment fails? What if the client changes their mind? What if the actor can't give the performance that they did in the screen test, or those sorts of things. So have backup scenarios, backup plans. So you're really been able to have a bit of a system in place if things go south. So anticipate but never assume. Keep an open mind, I think. Don't feel that you know everything. Don't feel closed off. There's only one way to do things. I think that is really short-term thinking. There's always another way to do something. And there's not necessarily ever a right way to do something. There's just a way to do something. So keep an open mind. Try and have fun. It can be a really stressful type job. And I think always look for the good in people. Try and find the good in the situation. Work hard, but try and have fun and be nice.
Wilf, I'd be remiss not to ask you just this one final one, and if you've got to go, let me know. But just with where you're at now, you've got your own production company. Just want to give us a bit of a rundown about what it is, what you're doing, where you're at, who's on board, where you see the future.
So yeah, I was at Sweetshop for 12 years, and I finished up last year and took some time off to work out what the next steps were. And I after a lot of thinking, I really realized that I missed the creative. I missed being on the creative day to day. In my previous role, I was seeing scripts from all over the world for all the directors and stuff like that, but I was quite removed from that creative process. And so I started my production company to be back amongst that creative. And I really love talking with creatives and agency producers and directors and DOPs and post companies, and because you get a brief and anything's possible, and you've got to start from this big wide world and then narrow it down to what is going to be the vision or the treatment for that script. And it's so inspiring being back amongst all that. So Fred is about me being back in the creative and offering a level of, I guess, experience to agencies and to creatives, like all my experience over the last little while, from a global perspective, from a local perspective, working with directors whose work I'm inspired by is one of the key things. We're not going to be a big company. We're not going to have a roster of 20 directors, 30 directors, because I actually think that we're going to see a bit of a change. And I think that, for me anyway, my relationship relationships with directors are going to be based on transparency and trust. And if they're entrusting me with their career, I want to be able to, hand on my heart, say I'm putting as much effort as I can personally into furthering their career, into talking to agencies about them, into trying to generate the best scripts I can for them. And I just don't believe that I can do that with a roster of 20 or 30 directors. So we're going to be much smaller. We're going to have a mix of local Aussie, Kiwi directors and a mix of international directors. And we're going to go slow. We're not going to rush to add heaps of directors all of a sudden, because again, I just want to be able to build those relationships, have that sense of trust, and really, like I really take to heart when I'm representing a director, like for all intents and purposes, where they're, often their only source of income, and everyone's got a family, mortgage, whatever it is. And I think if you've got too many directors on your roster, it can be really hard to fulfill those, what I call moral and ethical obligations to that director. So we'll keep it smaller compared to other companies that are out there, and I guess more boutique, and offering a really personalised service both to the directors, but also to the agencies, in that they'll trust, my creative radar, I guess, in terms of the directors I have on the roster, and why I think they're worthwhile putting forward for projects. It's been a lot of fun so far.
Wilf, it sounds like you had the Jerry Maguire moment, which is great. And I want to say thank you so much for jumping on board. Appreciate you taking the time. Good luck with Fred. I'm sure it will be a success. I'm sure you'll have fun. I'm sure you'll do amazing work. And for all the listeners who will tune in, your insights will certainly be valuable for them in their future endeavours. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, mate. Really happy to help out, and I've enjoyed the series so far, and good luck with the rest of it.
Thanks, Wilf. Well, that's it for today. I'll make the logo bigger. Thanks for hanging out with us. We've shared some insights and stories that I hope you found useful. Whether you're just getting started or diving deeper into ad production, there's always more to explore. Keep listening, stay curious, and we'll be back soon with some more from the world of production. Take care until then.